The 2016 presidential campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders is facing claims of sexism by former staffers. A report in the New York Times includes allegations from several female staffers who say they were mistreated by campaign surrogates and senior staffers and paid less than their male colleagues. The Vermont senator was questioned about the allegations during a Wednesday night interview on CNN.
I certainly apologize to any woman who felt that she was not treated appropriately. And of course, if I run, we will do better next time.
And just to be clear, you seem to indicate that you did not know at the time about the allegations. Is that correct?
Yes, I was a little bit busy running around the country trying to make the case.
Joining me now from Washington are Lynda Tran and Leslie Sanchez. Lynda is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist, and Leslie is a CBS News contributor and Republican strategist. Welcome to you both. Lynda, let me start with you. We heard Bernie Sanders say that he was, quote, a little bit busy to be aware of the claims of sexism in his campaign. What do you make of that response?
Well, I'd say tone deaf is probably the first thing to describe about the response to that. I mean, look, we're at a point where we just had the Year of the Woman, which was then defined by the Year of the Woman voter, and the Me Too movement and all of the things that we've seen develop over the last 12, 13 months tells you that you should not be responding in a sort of dismissive way that passes the buck. At the end of the day, if it's your campaign, you're ultimately responsible, and you're ultimately responsible not only for the culture that you set, but what you do to respond to it. I mean, it's coming at a terrible time for him, given that it's very likely he's going to announce that he's going to run for president for another round in 2020. And there are a lot of developments that are going on right now that are not going to be so good for him in terms of the field and how it's shaping up to be so different from 2016. The way the Democratic primary process is shifting, and there are going to be fewer caucus environments and fewer states where, you know, that kind of fervor that you saw in 2016 that benefited him are going to come into play in 2020. So to have something like this drop at this moment is not good news for him or for his campaign or potential campaign.
Leslie, let me ask you, Hillary Clinton apologized last year for not removing a staffer accused of sexual harassment from her 2008 campaign. As a campaign strategist, how prevalent of an issue is this in political campaigns?
It's highly unfortunate, Elaine, but it's extremely prevalent on both sides of the aisle. It really doesn't matter. If you think about how few female leadership positions there are in these campaigns, that kind of speaks to the issue of being tone deaf that Lynda's talking about. There are not a lot of opportunities for sexual harassment training in these startup campaigns that are moving so rapidly, but it's something that would really be a stark contrast from corporate America, for example, or any other type of workplace environment. This is almost the last area where this taboo is still unchecked, and there's not a lot of political power or power period that a lot of these female young staffers have. So that's where the disconnect is. And until you see and bring this forward and really take issue with it and take a leadership role, you're going to continue to have this idea where it's dismissed, it's really not important, and they don't want to take it seriously.
Lynda, same question to you. I mean, as somebody who has a lot of experience with campaigns, how prevalent of an issue is this?
I mean, Leslie is absolutely right. It is deeply pervasive. You know, it's something that I think is true across a whole bunch of different sectors, and we've seen those stories unveiled over the last year plus. But in political campaigns in particular that have been dominated by men at the top, men in leadership roles, in particular white men, you know, for Bernie Sanders, for this to come up, the part of the reason why it's problematic is not just that, you know, this is something that is a widespread issue across political campaigns, but it's pertaining to a campaign that's been described as the Bernie bros. I mean, I think the largest point here really is that for any campaign that is running in 2020, you cannot afford to be perceived as pale, male, and stale. And, you know, all of this really just feeds into that.
Well, Leslie, another issue raised in the New York Times report was the pay gap between male and female staffers who are doing the same work. So how problematic is this, considering that many candidates advocate for equal pay?
You know, in this particular story, Elaine, I'm not 100% confident, but I do believe I know some of the individuals in that piece. And I will tell you, early on, when the Bernie campaign was starting to gain momentum, particularly, and the example I'm going to give is Las Vegas, which is a very big Latino culinary area, good unionizing area, and an area that Bernie wanted to do well in. I knew some of these Latina staffers who were working countless hours, they were telling me, and unpaid. They were just like any campaign would be. You put in your your time and you hope that you get a paycheck. Unfortunately, the value of what they were bringing to the table is not necessarily matched with the value of some of their counterparts. It could be because they didn't have the experience. It could be they didn't know how to speak up and ask for a raise. They don't know what their market rate is. But there's a massive disconnect, not only in not knowing that information, but not asking for the proper pay. And so that's a consistency, not only in politics, but I think across, many lines of work.
Yeah, Lynda, I mean, same question for you. Is this pay inequality issue something that you think is systemic as well?
Well, I think it's systemic, but I also think that it is something that is shifting intentionally. And I think that's the only way to really change it. As somebody who has hired campaign staffers, as somebody who employs people now, the way that you get to gender income parity is to address it specifically, to look at it carefully, and to be aware that there are some cultural issues at play here as well. I mean, if you do not take a close look at your roster and the salaries that you are providing to individuals, it is highly likely that a man is going to ask for higher pay than women. It's just something that has been deeply entrenched in our culture, and that the best way for us to change it is for people who are in power to do so, to take a look and to be very careful about what you're doing.
Finally,
Elaine,
yeah, go ahead.
No, please. I was just going to add one point to that. I do think the responsibility is on the candidate as well, meaning the person who's asking for that. Because I've spoken with many human resource executives who'll say somebody will come in and, you get the male candidate, they ask for more money, the female candidate won't, and they have the same qualifications. They both perhaps get the job, but their starting point is different, which contributes to that gap as they go through their career. So, right. I think that's one of the education areas we've been working with young women and women in the workforce, just how to be competitive.
Right. That's an issue that is something we've heard about across many industries and areas. Finally, this question goes to both of you. How do you see the Me Too and Time's Up movements impacting the world of political campaigns and organizations? Leslie, let's start with you.
It's dramatically different because now there's a sensitivity to it, whether they want it to be there or not. And it's also kind of looking at there's a call now within these strategic meetings, and as the people are forming their kitchen cabinets, to find diverse voices who really bring a different perspective to the table. It's almost like people are doing to get to women on corporate boards. I equate it to the same thing, that there's an understanding that having a broad perspective on gender, on diversity, ethnic diversity, and among others, is bringing value to highly competitive markets and campaigns. And I think that's the positive we see all the way around.
Lynda, what do you think?
I mean, I also think that we're not seeing the tail end of it just yet. I think we're going to continue to hear stories from young women. I mean, I think back to 20 years ago on my very first campaign when a young man thought it was, actually not a young man, an older man thought it was totally appropriate to come into the campaign office and tell me if he were 20 years younger, he'd be chasing me around the table. And at the time, I had no idea how I was supposed to respond to something like that. And I thought to myself that maybe I was at fault somehow. And I'm so sure that young women on campaigns continue to feel that. And, part of what we saw come out of this whole story about the Bernie Sanders campaign, the allegations against it, was that the woman said she wasn't sure who to even tell or how to manage the situation. Now that you're hearing stories like this, I think that we're going to see the curtain lifted on a number of other campaigns and experiences as well. And I think that ultimately that serves the purposes of the movement to have these voices be heard and for people to take these allegations seriously so that we can change the way that we treat people.
All right, Lynda Tran and Leslie Sanchez, stay with us. We'll be back with you in a few minutes.